In this session, I'm going to talk about placement of particles when it comes to grid. If you want to follow along, using your own file, just download placement_grid_city and there you will have the city here. So I will go directly to the 3D viewport and here we have my little city that I built. So what we have here is more like building parts. And that I use to create these 10 buildings that are placed as particle on this plane here. If I select the plane and go to edit mode, you can see the difference between jitter and grid is that we don't have more than one simple face here and still get everything out as we get here with the particles. So let's look at the particle settings a bit here. We use emitter because if you use here, you don't have a grid here. You only have jittered or random. So you must use emitter to get the distribution called grid, which is the one we are using here. Grid is building on something called a resolution. The resolution is fairly simple. It's how many rows or columns you need in a matrix. So if I have a resolution of 10, you will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on each direction of your particles. So then you can just increase or decrease to create how many you want to. And you can, if you want to, get over the maximum of resolution and just write it like that. And then you get everything really packed here. If you use too high resolution, then that will be, of course, duplicates on your image. And it will like 2 or 3 buildings on the same place. So in our case, I think we use like 50 or something like that, which will be a good space between each building. Here, where we are building this city here, I use as a first start and end 1, since this is no animation. I just put everything in here so we can work with it. The problem we have with grid is that it's simple, but it's also rather stubborn or doesn't have that much functionality in. So let's say that you will move this around randomly and think that you can use random. Well, it is random, but it's random on all 3 directions, which means that if you do a random here, you will not only get them sideways, but you will also get up and down a bit here. So that can be a bit disturbing, and it's not so much you can do about it because you have that setting. And even if you go in and change your rotation or whatever, it will not change this behavior that grid has, that it goes up and down like a 3-dimensional grid. So it's not 2D, it's 3D. When you think about the grid here. So that is one thing. The other thing is you might want to have some space between here, like say that you have like a big street, then you don't want anything on that big street. If you've been working with particles before this course, you have learned that you can use like weight paint to get something to follow that path or to avoid that path. So we can try weight paint here and see what happens. So I select the plane and then I change from object mode to weight paint. So we have weight paint here. I can take and press F to decrease the size of my brush a little, and I can go into my tools here. And in stroke I can select so that the stroke method is line, because if I select line here, I can just drag a straight line somewhere. So, drag it like this. Right and now you can see nothing, and that is because we need more faces because we're using weight paint. So press tab, then we can just right click, subdivide, and you can put in like 50 since we're using the resolution is 50, so I put 50 here. And then you can work with the weight paint. So now I get back and I draw my line here, and as soon as I do that you can now see that I get a nice little fine line here. And I can draw it several times until I really get something that is red here. So now I have my line here, and if I want something to be off that or on that, I should change a few settings in my particles. So I go back to object mode again. I have now selected my plane, and the normal way to do this is that you go down to vertex group and you select density, and then you have name here, and that is by default. If you're going to weight paint, name groups, so we change that, and then the density should be very much on that line that I built, but you can't see any difference when working with grid, because grid is not sensitive to vertex group, so it's really a static thing to work with. So if you really want to have that road in the middle of your city, you should not use grid. You should go back to what you learned in the previous session and instead work with the jittered and have a particle phase of 1 here, and then you can see everything is scattered here. You can have a little bit of fewer numbers, and if you want the road to go there, you just reverse the density here. If I now increase again the number, you can see it's growing all the way, but it leaves this part here. So we have some space here because here we have some weight paint. So it works with jittered to work with weight paint to avoid areas or to make areas more sensitive to particles, but it doesn't work with grid. So grid is a simple thing. You don't need a lot of faces. You just put it in. You put, and I go back to grid so you can see it. You put just in the resolution here, and then you are like finished. That's all there is to it. So grid is simple to work with, but can be useful in many things, like for instance now when I would like to build this like 10 minutes city, then it's just for me to go and do some basic mesh things here, put on some texture material, and then just press render, and it starts to build my city, as you can see now. So that is all you have to know about the grid. So in the next session I will go through how random works instead. See you then, and bye for now.